Dear Lord, thank you for this night. Thank you that we can go through and gather together, Lord, as a community under you, God. I pray that as Alan comes up and speaks, Lord, that you would go through and speak through them, that tonight we could walk away with what you want us to hear, Lord, and help us have a safe rest of our week. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Sam. All right, well, if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Exodus chapter 2. Exodus chapter 2. We're going to walk through all of Exodus 1 and 2. We won't read all of it, but the hope is to kind of go do a little bit of a broad overview of Exodus 1 and 2. But we will begin our time by reading Exodus chapter 2, second book in the Bible. Exodus chapter 2, starting with verse 23. So I'm going to read that for us, and then we will get started. So this is Exodus chapter 2, starting at verse 23. It says, "During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew." All right. So tonight we're kicking off a new series through the book of Exodus. This is going to be a fall long series through the the book of Exodus. Sorry, my words are getting a little mixed up. We're kicking off today, and then hopefully by the end of the year we'll be done with the book of Exodus. We're not going to go necessarily verse by verse through each and every verse because it's a long book, but we will kind of tackle some of the main themes in the book of Exodus. Some of my kind of excitement over the book of Exodus is that I think it's one of the more, it's hard to say, but I think it's a really important book in the Old Testament. If you, in the New Testament, which we're probably a little bit more familiar with, you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That in those four gospel accounts, we hear of Jesus, what he did on the cross, his resurrection from the dead, and then in Acts, his ascension. And the rest of the New Testament is constantly pointing back to, look what Jesus did. The book of Exodus is kind of like the Gospels of the Old Testament. Because throughout the Old Testament, you're going to hear a lot of people, the prophets, being like, remember God and how he brought you out of the house of slavery. So the Exodus is going to give a picture of our redemption. Obviously, redemption of Israel, but it's going to point to the greater redemption that Jesus Christ brings for all people. So, a couple years ago, actually, I'm curious to know if anyone has seen this video or not, but a few years ago, there was this YouTube video that came out. It's called, It's Not About the Nail. Anyone seen that video or not? Okay, so in this video, it's this woman who has a literal nail in her head, and she is talking to, I think it's her husband, and just kind of saying, hey, I got this chronic headache, I have so much pain in my head, my sweater always gets snagged when I put it on, and it's just so painful. And then the husband's like, well, you got a nail in your head. That's probably the reason. She's like, well, you always talk about the nail. You always say the nail's the issue. Let's stop talking about the nail. I just have a really bad headache, and I just need you to listen to me. And they just keep going on, and then he finally gets to a place where he says, all right, I get it. It's painful. That must be really hard. I get it. And then she finally is like, thank you so much for listening to me. And when that video first came out, I was a year into marriage. And it actually really resonated with me a lot because I realized that I, as a man, I'm very different than my wife. Very different in a lot of different ways. We're similar in a lot of ways too, but something that we kind of wrestled with in our first year was something we kind of talked about a lot was when my wife Hannah was going through something that was a little bit more just tough, or just she had a rough day, or she had just an issue at work, or she had just different issue in life. And my immediate response was, I listen to her, and then I go to, how do I fix this problem? And for Hannah, she did not operate that way. What she wanted was, I don't need you to fix my problems, I just want you to listen to me. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from. I want you to understand like the pain that I'm experiencing. I don't care about how it's solved. I just need you to acknowledge that what I'm going through is difficult. And for me, that was kind of a foreign concept to me. I thought I was like, well, that's a really easy situation to solve, so let's just solve it. But she just needed to be understood. She needed to be heard. And in our passage today, we're going to see God do just that. The nation of Israel are under oppression by a cruel, cruel king. And we're going to see how God ministers to the nation of Israel, how he's eventually going to act. But before that, in the passage that we just read, it says that God hears their cries, he sees them in their situation, he remembers his covenant, and he says God knew. And we're going to talk about that. So here's kind of our big idea for this for tonight. It's that God knows the depths of our sufferings, and he has not forgotten his promises for us. God knows the depths of our sufferings, and he has not forgotten his promises for us. So if you go back to Exodus chapter 1, here's where the problem for the nation of Israel begins. It begins when a new Pharaoh is in charge in Egypt, and this Pharaoh does not know Joseph. See, up until this point, the nation of Israel, things were going pretty well for them. Joseph was second in charge in Egypt. So the nation of Israel was very well taken care of. But now that Joseph is gone, and he's dead, and then there's a new Pharaoh that does not know Joseph, this is where trouble starts to set in. Look with me in verses 9 through 11 of chapter 1. It says this. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land." Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh's store cities, Pithom and Ramesses. So what's going on here is that Pharaoh sees the nation of Israel as a threat. And it has nothing to do with anything that they've said. And it has nothing to do with anything the nation of Israel have done. The only reason he feels them as a threat is because they're getting really big. And he's scared of what might happen. So what is his plan? His plan is to oppress them. His plan is to force them into slavery. Because they're a large group, he said, you're going to do all these manual labor kind of type stuff, and he's going to force them to do it, and he's going to set taskmasters over them, afflict them, and just put them into slavery. That's his plan. He's going to make their lives miserable. This is what the passage says. It says that they were given difficult work in order to make their lives bitter. Taskmasters were put over them to afflict them. They were treated ruthlessly. Yet despite all of this, Pharaoh's plan isn't really working out. Look at verse 12. It says, "But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel." That's crazy. The Egyptians are the ones that are oppressing the nation of Israel, yet they're the ones that are scared. And the more that they're oppressing the nation of Israel is growing and multiplying. And since plan A doesn't work, he resorts to plan B. And plan B it's ugly. It is absolutely disgusting. He resorts to killing babies. I mean, the guy is completely out of control. He's so fixated on his own name and his own reputation, his kingdom, that he's willing to kill innocent babies. And crazy, he makes 2 Hebrew midwives do it. He's not even doing it himself. He commands Hebrew midwife, "Hey, if a baby is born and if it's a boy, I want you to kill it." This is the king of Egypt commanding people to kill innocent babies because he's afraid that one day they might do something. So he presses them, he inflicts pain upon them, and now he resorts to killing babies. And a question I think that comes to my mind is, how does someone get to a place like that? How can someone become so evil? oppressing people that have done nothing wrong, and killing innocent babies because he's afraid of the unknown. But the problem is, I think that we see a lot of this even in our own day today. I mean, people in positions of power abuse their authority. Rather than using their power as a way to serve people and guide people, they take advantage of people and they use it for financial gain or even their own pleasure. People abuse authority. People in power abusing their authority to take over, using their power to abuse people. And I think to myself often, how can people get to be like this? Even as I watch the news, and I'm like, there's so much evil going on, and it's not just evil going on, but people are promoting it as a good thing. How do people get there? And I think the only reasonable answer is sin. Sin is the reason that people act this way. Sin blinds us to what is good and what's true. And we see this in the life of Pharaoh. I mean, the guy is just completely out of control. He's under the grip of sin. He wants status, he wants security, and he will do whatever it takes to keep his kingdom, to keep his status as king. And any little threat that comes his way, he will take care of it. That's his plan, even resorting to killing babies. And the problem with living this way and being controlled by sin like Pharaoh was, is that you're always living in fear. The guy should be the most secure person in the world. He has probably the biggest kingdom at that time. He has all the money that he wants. He has servants. He has all these people serving him. Yet he's so insecure. He's so afraid because he's worried of someone taking his job, someone taking his name. How can the most powerful being or person at that time be so insecure and be so afraid of this nation that hasn't even done anything to him? And honestly, I think that's a bigger scale, but even for me, I think I could feel that when we get off track, when we forget why we do the things that we do, when we forget that it's all about God, not about us, but when we get focused on our own name, our own reputation, doing things our way, we can fall into a trap like this. I mean, I feel like this even in like being a pastor and being in ministry. I have to fight this urge to not make it about me. On our pastoral staff, we have a staff meeting around twice a month where all of our pastors come into the room and we just share how ministry is going. We spend some time in the Word and then we just share how ministry is going. How is the Lord working in our ministries? And different pastors, they go around the table and they share just cool stories of how the Spirit is working in different areas of our church. How God is working in youth ministries, in small groups, in communities, in all these different ways. And it's really a cool time. But a lot of the times, I can get very cynical and I can get jealous of the ways that the Lord is working in other people's ministries and not mine, or how it seems like success is happening there, but I feel like I'm not meeting the expectations that I should be meeting. And instead of celebrating the work of God in the lives of people and in different ministries, I can get really cynical about, is the Lord really working in your ministry? Is the Lord really doing stuff there? Or I get jealous and I'm just like, I want to see more. I want to see more. I want this to be about me. I want the praise. I want people to recognize me. And I get off track. Not being focused on the glory of God, but being focused on my own glory. And in a little way, kind of like Pharaoh. And this is just a really bad way to live. This isn't the freedom that Christ purchased for us on the cross. Because what I'm doing is I'm purposely enslaving myself to sin. I'm putting myself under the authority of sin, living for my own glory. And the problem with living for our own glory is that that's not the design of the universe. The universe does not spin around us. So if we try to live for our own glory, we are going to get so frustrated because that's not the intent of the universe. The intent of the universe is to bring glory to God, and it's only when we start living for the glory of God, our lives make sense, and we start to experience joy and happiness. And Pharaoh did not understand that. He was so busy trying to make a name for himself. He was so insecure. He was so fearful. He was about his kingdom, his empire. How big can I make it? And honestly, the whole book of Exodus is a story of a king trying to make a name for himself, doing everything in his power to stop God's purposes, and he loses. He gets humiliated. I mean, even notice how in verse 15, it says that the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of them, whose name was Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew woman and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. Notice how the name of Pharaoh isn't even mentioned there. But who are the two Hebrew midwives, who at that time were probably nobodies, especially compared to the king of Egypt. They're nobodies, yet I think it's very interesting that the author of Exodus leaves out Pharaoh's name, just calls him Pharaoh, but he names these two Hebrew midwives by name. And I think that goes to show, because the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, was living for his own name, living for his own glory, and we don't even know who he is if we just read this. It failed him. He tried so hard living for his own glory and for his name, and he loses. He completely loses. So if chapter 1 is focused on the oppression of God's people, they're enslaved, they're oppressed, and Pharaoh is trying to kill their sons. That's the situation of the nation of Israel and Egypt. They experienced high highs, and now they are at the bottom. They have nothing. Absolutely nothing. And then chapter 2 comes in. And in chapter 2, here's kind of the main point that we see in chapter 2. God is always at work, even when we cannot see it. That's kind of the main idea, I think, of chapter 2. So what's happening is God is raising up a deliverer in Moses who will eventually lead Israel out of Egypt. And from the way the story is told, you can tell that this baby, this Moses, is very, very special. I mean, through the efforts of his mom and obviously the sovereign hand of God, Moses escapes death. Look at chapter 2, verses 2 to 3. It says, the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. He put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the river bank. So since the midwives didn't obey Pharaoh's voice of killing the sons of the Hebrew midwives, so he commands now the whole nation, all his people, and says, hey, if a baby boy is born from the Hebrew women, throw them into the Nile so that they drown. So he just calls out he calls his people and says, throw them into the Nile. Get rid of them. Just get rid of them. And this guy is just going worse and worse and worse. But it's just, you see in chapter 2 that you can tell that God has a plan for Moses. Like the midwives, Moses' mom, she figures out a way out. She gets his son in a basket and flows him down the Nile River, and he ends up in Pharaoh's daughter's lap. I mean, God's hand is all throughout that whole situation, and it's no accident that he ends up there. It's not an accident that Moses ends up where he's at. If you read Acts 7:22, this is the speech of Stephen. He says this, and Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. So Moses spends 40 years in the house of Pharaoh, and this is going to prove invaluable for his mission. It's going to be so key to his mission in bringing Israel out of Egypt that he spends 40 years as Pharaoh's daughter's son. He knows Egypt. He knows the people. He knows the culture. He's learning skills that he would not have had if he didn't end up in Egypt. So again, here you already see God's doing something. God is at work. But here's the thing. If you're the nation of Israel, you don't know that. You can't see that. You're just suffering. You're doing your daily task of being enslaved. Your babies are dying. But God is up to something. You can't see it, but God is up to something. And it's very possible, I think, for many of us in this room to feel like you're in a circumstance that you do not find very favorable right now. And I think what this passage does is it reminds us that God is at work. He is doing something. And we just can't always see it. He's preparing us for something. I mean, 40 years in Egypt, do you think Moses understood what was going on in 40? He wasn't doing anything for 40 years, but God was using that to prepare him. I think there's people in this room who probably walked through some extremely painful stuff in their life. And you've seen the Lord maybe use that to minister to other people. As Paul says in 2 Corinthians 1:3-4, where he says, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction." Now obviously that doesn't lessen the severity of what you're experiencing, what you're going through. It gives purpose to your suffering. That God is at work, that He's doing something, He has not abandoned you, He has not forgotten you. That's suffering, but some of us, I feel like maybe you're in a position today where you just feel like the job that you're in currently, or even your college years, they just feel like a waste. You don't feel like you're using your gifts and your talents to the best of your ability. You feel like your job is just something you have to do in order to get to the next step, or college is a step that you need to do to get to the next step, but you feel like the moment right now feels like a complete waste. There's no meaning to it, there's no purpose to it. But is it possible that God is at work in you and He's preparing you for something right now, in the midst of where you are at right now, like Moses was? For 40 years, he was in the house of Egypt, with no direct plan. And I just think in these seasons where we're not in a situation that we like, it just feels like a waste of time. It feels like you could be doing better things with your life. Back in college, I dated a girl for around a year and a half. She was the first girl I ever dated, and I thought she was the one. Apparently, she did not. But the summer between my sophomore and junior year of college, she was from Alaska, so we went to school together, but she was in Alaska, so I went to visit her. I stayed with her family for a week, and it was really awesome. Really great time. But I noticed towards the end of the trip that she started to be a little bit distant. She was pulling away a little bit, and I tried to address it, but she didn't really say anything at the time. Until I came back home, and I just kept pushing her on. I was like, something's up, something's weird, this isn't right. And she finally was like, I just feel like our relationship is kind of heading towards like the end of it. And it kind of came as a shock to me, and I was pretty devastated. And a few weeks later, that's what happened. She just ended it, and I was just really crushed by it. And I just remember one of the things that I experienced during that time was, because I had it took me a long time to get over it. One of the things I felt was, what was the point? Why did I invest so much time and energy into that person, into that relationship, and in the end, it felt like it was for nothing? What was the point of that relationship? I'm not going to get that year and a half back. What was the point? It felt like a big waste of time. Yet I think there was just a lot of valuable lessons that I did take from it. One of them being, because when she broke up with me, I thought, man, there's no way that I'm ever going to get over her. I'm never going to find someone like her. I'm not going to find someone better. But during that time, with time and the work of the Spirit, I came to a place where I was content with not being with her. I came to a place where I realized, no, that wasn't the best person for me. It was a place where I was just content not being with her, and it helped me to learn, hey, I can't put so much weight on a person. I can't put so much weight in a relationship. And I also learned that God can heal us in those situations where you feel like, that I felt like there was no way out of it. But God heals. And He did something, and He taught me that He can heal when we're feeling pain. And that no human being can satisfy us like He can. Those are things that I learned from this time where I felt like it was a waste of time, because with the Lord, there are no wasted years. And we see this again in the second half of chapter 2 with Moses being in the wilderness. So in the first half of chapter 2, it begins on a high note. Israel's oppressed. Finally, a glimmer of hope comes up. It seems like a special baby. God protects him. And then all of a sudden, second half of chapter 2, we find out he's a murderer, and then he ends up flying, he ends up just going away to the wilderness. Begins on a high note, ends on a, okay, we gotta go back to plan A, or the next plan B. Begins on a high note, and then it's like, you just think like, gosh, there's something special about this person, and then it's like, no, I don't know about this anymore. He's not in the picture anymore, and he's a murderer. So I think in a lot of ways, though, these 40 years, so he spent 40 years in the house of Egypt, and then 40 years in the wilderness. So that's 80 years, total of 80 years passes in chapter 2. And I think these 40 years are also formative for Moses. He had to be in Egypt. He had to be in Pharaoh's house. But he also had to experience the wilderness. And here's why. Because in a lot of ways, Moses had not experienced the sufferings of his people. He was in Pharaoh's house. So though he was a Hebrew, while his people were suffering, he was living in luxury. He didn't experience what his people were experiencing. He lived like an Egyptian. He didn't experience the pain and sufferings of the Hebrews. I mean, notice how in verse 19, Moses is described as an Egyptian. He's a Hebrew, but they see him as an Egyptian. So what Moses is experiencing in these 40 years is what it's like to be an outcast, to be a stranger. He's now able to identify with his people in a way that he could not have had before. I mean, and that should point us and remind us to Jesus too, who took on human flesh so he can identify with us. He didn't just save us from afar, but he came to be one of us, to identify with us. And he didn't live a wealthy life. He didn't live, in the world's eyes, a successful life. He suffered. He died in his 30s. He didn't own a home. He wasn't married. He didn't have a great job. And for 30 years, he lived in obscurity. Nobody knew who he was. Jesus came to identify with us before delivering us. And Moses had to learn this lesson. He had to know, if you're going to rescue your people, you need to know what they're experiencing. You need to identify with your people. So in this season, in chapter 2, God is at work, but no one sees it. Not even Moses. He's doing something, just nobody can see it. And that should be an encouragement to us in this season. If you're in a season of, you're like, what is going on? I have no idea what's going on with my life. I have no idea what I'm going to be doing. I've switched my major 50 times. I don't know if I'm going to graduate on time. All these different questions. Could it be possible that the Lord is working in you in the midst of it right now, preparing you for something? Preparing you to be more like Jesus in this season of waiting. And I totally understand in our culture, it's really hard to be patient and to wait. Because we get everything so quickly. I love what John Piper says. He says, God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you may be aware of 3 of them. God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you may be aware of 3 of them. And I think this passage is a perfect example of that. God is doing 10,000 things in chapter 2, and no one is aware of any of it. Not even Moses. But God is preparing Moses for something. For a huge work. In 80 years, for 80 years, he thinks he's living a random life. Here's kind of the last section that I want to get to. So chapter 1, we saw that the people of Israel, they're oppressed. Secondly, in chapter 2, we're seeing God raise up Moses as a deliverer. And now in this last section, before we get to chapter 3, God is getting ready to act. Look, we're going to read that passage again, verses 23 to 25. It says this. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. It says God hears, God remembers, he sees, and he knows. And I love this. What this passage is trying to show us is that God he's not deaf to our cries. He hears all of our prayers, all of our groanings, all of our cries for help. He's not deaf to it. He hears it. And not only does he hear it, he sees you in the midst of it. He sees what you're experiencing. He's not distant from it. And thirdly, he says he remembers. And that's kind of a weird thing, because does that mean God forgot something and that he just needed to remember? Like he was just like, oh, my people are suffering. Oh, there was that covenant I made with Abraham. I should do that. That's not what's going on. Kevin DeYoung, who's a pastor, says this. God's remembering always involves moving toward the object of his memory. For God, to remember is to act, to forget is to refuse to respond. So what it means when it says that God remembers his covenant, it means that he's going to act on the promise that he made. The promise that he made to Abraham, that he was going to give him land, that he was going to make him into a great nation, and then eventually, through his offspring, that all the nations of the earth will be blessed. That's the promise. And in reality, in chapter 1, we already saw a little bit of that already happening. The people of God are being oppressed, yet they grow. They're being enslaved, yet they grow. They're trying to kill their babies, yet they grow. That's already starting to happen. But now, as a result of God remembering his covenant, the author is reminding us that God's now going to act, that he has not forgotten the promise that he made. See, for if God makes a promise, he keeps it. If he makes a promise, he keeps it. And this is why he's going to use Moses to deliver Israel from slavery. And it's the same motivation that moves God to send his son Jesus to the earth. See, as I mentioned earlier, the Exodus provides a picture of our own redemption. See, every single one of us, Israel's enslaved by Egypt, but every single one of us were enslaved to sin. See, sin, like Egypt, is a cruel taskmaster. And it still is. Sin uses us. Sin speaks lies to us. It takes life from us. It makes false promises to us. It makes promises that say, hey, I will satisfy you, I will fulfill you, do this, and you will have meaning in life. And it does not deliver. It cannot deliver. Sin plays the same old tricks every single time, and yet we just keep buying into it because we were enslaved to it. And whenever we sin, we are enslaving ourselves to its power. Yet God, in his mercy, he remembered his covenant, and he sent his son Jesus, and his death breaks the power of sin over our lives. The blood that he spilled on Calvary's cross covers all of our sins. His death covers all of it. And as God was raising up Moses to deliver Israel out of the house of bondage, he sends Jesus to us to free us from slavery to sin. Because that's what we have to see sin is. Sin is slavery. When sin is our master, it controls us. You think you have control over your sin, but it has a control over you. Sin is a cruel taskmaster. Sin controls us. Sin is more powerful than Pharaoh. Lastly, we heard that God heard, God saw, God remembered, and now it says God knew. And the phrase God knew, he's not just saying, I know that you're suffering. It's not just, I have all facts. But he's saying, I know what you're experiencing. He knew how it was affecting them. He knew how hard it was on their bodies to be doing manual labor day by day. He knew what they were experiencing in their hearts as they were being yelled at and told what to do. He knew that they were experiencing loss of hope in the promises of God. He knew He knew the experience of these mothers who for 9 months were dreading the day that they would give birth to a son because they would have to kill it. He knew all of those things, not just a knowledge of the facts, but he knew it. He experienced it. He knows what they're experiencing, and he knows what we're experiencing. He's close to us in our times of difficulty. Going back to the relationship I was telling you about. So the day that girl broke up with me, I was crushed. I was a mess. I was at Biola at the time, and I drove back onto campus and went to my best friend's apartment. There was 4 of them living there, and that's the first thing I did. I went to their apartment, and I went in, I opened the door. The one I was closer to, my best friend, he was actually taking a nap, but the other guy, who was also a friend, he was doing his homework. He saw me come in, he saw me crying, he stood up and just started walking towards me, and I kind of mumbled, and finally I told him what happened. And when I told him what happened, I just see him coming closer and closer and faster, and all he does, he just grabs me and holds me tight and just lets me cry. And honestly, in that moment, I honestly can't think of anything better he could have done. Because in that moment, I didn't need him to say anything. I didn't need him to fix me. All I needed was that he knew me and he understood what I was experiencing. And him just giving me a hug and not saying anything communicated, I understand. I know what you're experiencing. And at times, the best thing someone can do in the midst of our pain and suffering is to just show up. Listen to us, cry with us. People who know our pain is significant and just want to be there, it's the greatest gift. They don't need to say anything, they don't need to do anything. They just need to show up, and they just need to know that they care. And this is what God does. Does he fix the problem? Yes. But before he fixes the problem, he enters in, he knows, he experiences. And this is even to a greater degree for those of us who know Jesus, who live after the cross. Jesus took on human flesh. He experienced our pain firsthand. He's not distant. He came and he experienced it, all of us. I think the cool thing about it is Jesus, before he came to just fix the problem, he wanted to understand how we experience our problems. He didn't just fix it, he wanted to know how we experience it, and he did, to the greatest degree, even death on a cross. And the beauty of what he does is, eventually he does fix the problem. He dies on the cross, he purchased victory and salvation for us, and one day there will come a day when we will not experience pain anymore. And we won't even, all the pain, the hardest pain that you can even imagine on this earth will feel like nothing in heaven. This is what Romans 8:18 says. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. There will come a day when the greatest pain that you've ever experienced in eternity will feel like nothing. Jesus purchased that on the cross. So we have a few table talk discussion questions that we're going to put some up on the screen. We also have a piece of paper at your tables. There's 4. You do not have to go through all of those questions. Pick ones that you want to. We're going to just spend a few minutes in discussion, and then I'm going to come up and then wrap it up, and then we'll have a couple songs of worship. So. The main idea of tonight has been that God knows the depths of our suffering, and he has not forgotten his promises for us. God knows our sufferings. He knows all of it, all that we're experiencing. He's not forgotten his promises, nor us. And it's one thing to say that, it's one thing to teach that, it's one thing to read that, and it's another to actually believe that to be true. And it's a hard truth to believe, especially when suffering lasts a really long time, specifically like it did for the nation of Israel. 40, 80, 400 years of that means people are their whole life experiencing just pain and suffering. And there's probably just the thought of, is this ever going to end? They feel forgotten, they feel abandoned, the promises of God just feel very distant for them. In suffering, I think we have a lot more questions than answers. And as humans, when our friends or our family members and different people that we know are experiencing extreme pain, it's hard to actually say anything that means anything or that's helpful. But I do think this passage is helpful in the sense that what we do know is that God does hear our cries. He hears our groanings. He hears and he sees how painful it is. So it's worth going to him day by day, asking him for help, asking him to intervene. And secondly, that he knows not just in theory, but he knows exactly what you're experiencing. Jesus himself experienced it for us. He's our sympathetic high priest. He knows what we're experiencing, and the beauty of what the gospel provides is that eventually there will come a day when all of it will be gone, all our pain's going to be gone, all of it's not going to feel like anything, and Jesus is going to be king, and life is going to be what it was meant to be, but even in a greater sense. So hopefully that's just kind of the encouragement from Exodus 1 and 2, that God knows what you're experiencing. He's not forgotten you. He's not abandoned you. And if you're in a season of suffering, hopefully that is helpful. And if we're not, I hope it provides kind of just some things and promises to kind of cling to when those times come. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you that you hear us. Even as I'm just talking to you, you hear what we're saying. You're not deaf to our words. You know exactly what's in our hearts. You know what we're experiencing. Even today or this week, if we've walked through some tough stuff, I just pray, God, that you would allow us to go to you, that we would talk with you, that we would hear from you, and that we would be reminded and know for a fact that you know us, you see us. And I think the beauty of the gospel, God, is that you, when you think of us, the things that you remember are you remember your grace, you remember your promises, you remember your covenant, and you forget our sins. You forget our shortcomings. You forget the ways that we failed you. God, thank you so much for your word and giving us a picture of redemption, showing us a picture of how you are a deliverer, how you deliver us out of slavery. And just pray that we would be a community and a people that are not going back to Egypt. We're not going back to slavery. But we're looking forward to the promised land. We're looking forward to eternity. We're looking forward to eternity with you. And we see that as better than what this world has to offer. We love you, and it's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
Oh, you are worthy. I lift my voice to sing worthy. I bow my life to exalt thee. Jesus, you alone. Jesus, you alone.
One of the big things that just kind of stood out to me as I was preparing for this message and thinking about Exodus 1 and 2 specifically in the area of the life of Moses, that line from John Piper really encouraged me a lot. That God is always doing 10,000 things and we may only be aware of 3 of them. I think that for me it's just really encouraging where, God, I have ups and downs in my days. It's just so good to know that I'm not the one that's in control. He's in control. He knows what he's doing. He's smarter than I am. He's stronger than I am. He's just overall he knows what he's doing, and he's always doing 10,000 things, and we just may be aware of a few of them. So I think that's kind of the biggest encouragement for tonight as you leave. It's just remember that God is at work. You may not see it, and I hope that one day we can, but I think the beauty of heaven and the beauty with going into our promised land, which is in heaven, is I think we're going to be able to see all the ways that we've missed God doing those 10,000 things, and I think it's just going to give us opportunities to just praise and worship Him. But I just love that in the moment right now that we can be reminded that God is at work, even if we cannot see it. So that's kind of just my encouragement and hope for us.